morning, family. This is Ricky, and welcome to Hope for Today. If there's one thought I would want your soul to hang on to today for this devotional, it's this notion. Here it is. Closeness with God results in power from God. Hang your hat on there, right? And let me say it one more time and get it in your spirit. Closeness with God results in power from God. I don't know what God's entrusted to you in this season, what kind of difficulties that you're seeing in your life, what kind of challenges that you have that you're trying to overcome. But I know if you're anything like me, if you're entrusted with something that's difficult or challenging, obviously we're supposed to bring our whole selves to that challenge, right? Our intellect, our experience, our resources, our know-how, our relationships, because after all, God called us to that particular thing. And so we ought to bring our whole selves to that. But if you're not careful, friend, you'll start to put your faith more in what you bring than who God is. And what ends up happening is if you feel like you have less talent and less intellect and less resources, you'll start to feel overwhelmed in that challenge. And so far, you're putting your faith solely in what you bring as opposed to who God is, which is exactly why I believe we need to go to the scripture that reminds us that closeness to God results in power from God. Let me give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 4. Paul says, "And my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power." The Apostle Paul is reminding the Corinthian churches that when he showed up to pastor them and what God had entrusted to them, he says, what was impressive was not my words and my wisdom and my experience. What was impressive was that I loved God and I loved his gospel. And as a result, God honored that with demonstration and power. It was the power of God that moved their hearts, not anything that he brought to the table. You see what I'm trying to say there? Closeness with God results in power from God. And I just want to encourage you, if you feel like you're not bringing enough to the table, you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, you're not strong enough, at the end of the day, if you love Jesus, know that Jesus' hand is on your life. If you love God, his hand is on your life. Stories told of some revival services. It was Friday night at the crusade, and the pastor of the church had invited two preachers. One, a young intellectual preacher. He was 23 years old, fresh out of Harvard University, brilliant young man who had the assignment to preach the 23rd Psalm, and with eloquence, he waxes all throughout perfect homiletics and beautiful poetic words to kind of bring to bear the good news that was the 23rd Psalm. And of course, he finishes his sermon and the people give him a wonderful golf clap because they appreciated so much of what he had to say. The choir sings a song, and then the pastor brings up an old preacher. He literally was wearing overalls and a suit jacket over it. He was an old farmer of a preacher, and he had been to school and he had had a formal training. And the old man gets up there and with broken language and participles dangling, he mutters through his lesson and just kind of testifies as to the goodness of God in the 23rd Psalm. But the people were moved and they were tearing up and they were heartbroken and they were repenting. And when the old man sat down, the church stood on their feet with tears streaming from their eyes with a thundering applause. And the young preacher said to the pastor, "I don't understand. I'm from Harvard and I know this and I knew the Hebrew and I knew this, and they gave me a golf clap." But to the old man who has no education at all, they were moved with tears. What gives? And it's then that the pastor leans over to the young preacher and says, "Well, the difference is that you know the 23rd Psalm, but the old man knows the shepherd." Closeness with God results in power from God. And that is hope for today. I'll see you next time.